Fat loss. Let's talk about it. All right, team, you're here with me, Coach Chicken Legs. We're kind of touching on all the different major forms of training that you're probably going to run into with the general public. And we're also touching on these things because it'll give you an idea of where you kind of want to specialize as a coach. Your kind of beginning goal is to take on as many clients as you can, so you can discover what skill sets you best have, whether that be skill sets around weight loss, around hypertrophy, around power, whatever it be, and then deep diving onto those topics so that your programming can become even more effective. Weight loss is probably the king, probably the most common thing that I've ever seen asked for in the health industry. Hypertrophy, so muscle growth, is a pretty close, maybe close second, but fat loss usually has stuff beat. Most people who are doing hypertrophy normally have a general idea of how muscle growth works themselves and often aren't looking for health advice from practitioners and professionals like us. But weight loss is incredibly common. Most of your clients will come in as weight loss clients. And so it's pretty imperative that you have a good understanding of how weight loss works, as well as how you can give advice and programming around weight loss specifically. And let's smash it by, realistically, it's not that challenging as a general concept. The general concept is you need to burn more calories than you eat. Meaning the amount of calories you ingest needs to be less than the calories that you eat. Pretty straightforward. If that's the case and your body weight is 80 kilos and you're eating less than you're burning, you will slowly start losing weight over time until your body plateaus out at whatever that new calorie to weight to exercise ratio is. Okay, so if you dropped your calories down by 300 or 500 calories a day, but you're still burning the same amount of excess energy, you'll start plateauing down to a new weight, which for argument's sake, let's say drops you down to 75 kilograms. We're not doing pounds, we're Australian. So 85 down to 75, that might be where the client wanted to be. We're laughing. You would think that makes this kind of programming really, really easy. However, it certainly doesn't, because there is so much emotion tied up into weight loss that it gets a bit skew-iffy, as well as people think since a little bit of calorie deficit, meaning less calories than I'm eating than I'm using, if less is good, surely lots of, or a huge deficit where I cut all my food out is better. So why do a little when I can do a lot? That just doesn't work traditionally. Your body freaks out. It just goes into shock. It goes into what the hell's going on. And often clients can't maintain it. So they go through like this yo-yoing effect, which means that clients forever putting on weight, then losing it, then putting that weight back on, then losing it, because they think a lot over time, a lot quickly is better than a little over time. And there's just all the supporting evidence for weight loss is tiny amounts of change over longer periods of time versus huge amounts if the client wants to keep it off long term. Okay. If you want to do a lot quickly for a show, or you want to do for a fight, or you need to hit a certain weight for a sport, that's a different story. But when we want to just reduce the amount of body fat or excess tissue that we have, we usually do it over a long period of time with small and short changes, being slight calorie deficits versus how much we are exercising and performing. Okay, so because of that, when we talked about hypertrophy in a previous video, we talk very specifically about weight ranges, we talk about percentages of 1RMs, rep ranges, time under tension, all these really valuable and necessary things. Weight loss is a little bit less specific, where it cares more about how many calories burnt than it does how much movement you did. I am going to give you some general rep ranges, and we're going to talk generally about the difference between weight training for fat loss and actual traditional cardiovascular training for weight loss. So let's look at weights training for weight loss first. Now, there is a common misconception that weights training doesn't help you with the weight loss, that you need to do cardio-based stuff and all you should ever do is avoid the weights and jump on the treadmills. It's not the case. Weight loss, as we've kind of just discovered, in its most simplest form, is less calories in than you are expelling. So you're having less than you are doing. So that can be done with weights, that can be done with cardio, that can be done with whatever. The body doesn't necessarily care, they just do it in slightly different ways. So let's talk about weight training now. So the common misconception that you can only do one form of training or the other, or weights don't help you lose weight, or you have to do traditional cardiovascular style training for you to be able to lose weight. It's just not the case. As we've kind of just discussed, we know that all weight loss is ingesting less calories than we're burning. So we can do that with weight training, or we can do it with traditional cardio-based training, which is just like running. And traditional cardio-based training is running or bike riding or whatever. Cardiovascular training just means heart rate or heart variability training, or using the cardiovascular system during training. So traditional cardio training doesn't make a lot of sense in the actual text side of stuff because you're talking about a system. But for this context and for the client's context, you're just talking about the actual machines. Where this is relevant, because we care a little less about sets and reps and all this stuff as we do about calories being burnt. So in traditional weights training, there are kind of two forms of training you'll do with your heart rate and with your clients, and that's interval training and there's steady state training. Interval training is when I elevate my client's heart rate and then I return it back to normal. And it's seen a lot in weights training because it's quite traditional, and it's usually what people are doing in a gym setting where they're picking something up heavy and they're moving it until they can't move it anymore, and then they put it back down, they rest, and then repeat, burning calories as they do so. Steady state training is when you simply get your heart rate up to a point that you can maintain and you want to play with for the client, so whether that's high, middle, or low, and you hold it for as long as you can. And that would be seen probably in the most common sense as traditional cardio training, like running. I get my heart rate to like a middle or low level, and I hold it for as long as my body allows me to hold it for. Make sense? Good. Inside those two spaces, we can do high intensity training, we can do middle or mid-intensity training, and we can do low-intensity training, yeah? The only difference of these is how much output you're doing. Low intensity, in the context of weight loss, burns less calories, but can be maintained for long periods of time. Think about a long walk. Middle-intensity training burns a middle amount of calories, or more calories than the low, but can't be maintained as long, but you can still maintain it. Think of it like a jog. And high intensity training burns lots of calories really quickly, but cannot be maintained for long. Think sprinting. You burn lots, but you can't do it for very long. So those are the three things that we consider when we're doing traditional weight loss training. So how does this apply to in the gym when we're actually getting a client to do weight related stuff? So when we talk about power and stuff, we kind of mentioned that power and hypertrophy has set weights, they have set reps, they have set sets, they have how many times a week they kind of want to see training. Similar to weight training for weight loss, I would probably expect rep ranges for weight loss to be between 8 and 15.
Hey team, if you're liking this content, what I need you to do is follow us, support us, leave comments. We're here to help programmers be better at programming, make coaches and PTs the best of the best that we can, and it starts with programming and it starts with you. Share, like, subscribe.
Good space, higher end, so burning more calories. I would expect the weights to be at about 60 to 75% of their 1RM capacity, meaning that whatever they could lift the object for one, being their maximum effort they possibly could do, I would expect 60 to 75% of that number being their working amount. Okay, so even though we are doing weights training, it is important to test their 1RMs relatively regularly so we know if the client is tracking in a space, and so we can actually program appropriately for that client. Okay. We still have the Goldilocks rule, where for our 8 to 15 reps, Goldilocks rule I use every day and is amazing. I love it. It's an in-house coined phrase, but Goldilocks rule is not too hot, not too cold. So if the client does more than 15 reps, you're starting to look into perhaps the weight is too light. And then for our less than 8 reps, the weight might be too heavy. So again, we're all about trying to burn as many calories as we can. So if our weight is so light that they can do 50 reps, you might not be burning many calories, versus if the weight is so heavy they can barely do 6 or 3, it might be too heavy for them to allow themselves to burn enough calories. So our goal is always calorie burn, calorie burn, calorie burn. So although this might be a good rep range for, you might trend towards hypertrophy based numbers, which is more like 6 to 12. We care not so much about the reps as we do about the amount of burn we get. And 8 to 15 is just a good general number to not confuse the client, but do understand that you can do lots and lots of, you can do like 25 reps if you want at a higher intensity, but just for the ease of the client and the ease of you learning, before you yourself become a specialist in weight loss, I suggest you just follow the basics until you read more text that would suggest otherwise. This is all very general advice for people. I do understand that there are exceptions outside of all of this stuff, right? Now, I would expect again, this weight training ratio between 2 and 5 sets-ish per muscle group, or particularly in the context of weight loss, but for compound muscles. So when we talked about hypertrophy, I mentioned that there is compound movements, and then there is specific isolation movements. So stuff like sitting down on a leg press and moving a large weight using all of your lower limb to do so is compound, or being squats or bench press or deadlifts, versus isolation movements might be stuff like doing curls or sitting down and doing isolated leg extensions or doing calf raises or something that's isolating specific muscles. In weight loss, now you don't have to do this, but this is again a general rule of thumb. We more often than not lean on compound movements for weight loss. The question is why? Why do we do that? Well, if your client asks, or if you're trying to educate someone else, a good rule of thumb is we like compound movements for weight loss because A, it recruits many muscles, so you're burning a lot of energy because lots of muscles are involved. The trick is in the word there too. Since we're burning more energy, it means we're burning more calories. It also means that as stuff starts fatiguing, there are other muscles involved to allow the client to continue to perform the movement. So if, for example, we're doing reps of crawling or battle ropes or squats, since there's so many muscles involved in those movements, if my biceps completely fatigue during battle ropes, my shoulders, forearms, and back will also start taking over to allow the client to continue to burn calories and can continue to do those movements. Same as if I'm doing running, since there's so much movement and so many muscles involved, could be considered as a compound movement because it uses more than one muscle to perform the action. In bodybuilding, we like isolation movements because we're trying to get specific things to grow ahead of the global body. But for weight loss clients, compound movements are often favored. That's not necessarily true all the time, but you'll be very commonly seen in a good weight loss program to mainly have compound movements focus on weight training days. Lots of information for you. We love it, but this is stuff to consider. For your rest time, usually lower rest time because we're playing with lower percentages in the weights, and between sets, ratios of 1-to-1 or 1-to-1.5 are probably appropriate, where if it takes me a minute to do the exercise, maybe a minute rest. If it takes me a minute to do the exercise and it's a harder exercise, maybe a minute and a half rest is probably more appropriate, all the way up to 2, 3, or 4 minutes. The idea here is not to fatigue the client so much that they can't really continue. It's more about getting them to continuously work. So it's not unreasonable to think that sometimes in a client session, there will be no rest. You warm them up, you put them in a circuit that does 3 or 4 movements on repeat and just have some movements easier than others, and they just do that for the whole session. It's just about burning calories in a way that doesn't injure the client long term. That's your goal. You don't want to put them in such a deficit they get injured, sick, and tired, but you want to put them in enough of a deficit that you start seeing this weight loss results. That you should be tracking. We love tracking stuff. Tracking is #good, if hashtag is still a thing by the time I post this video. Now, cardio sessions run a little bit differently. Cardio sessions are running by the same principles. So if I do perhaps 2 or 3 weight loss sessions, weight training sessions a week, if the client wants diversity, for cardio sessions, I can do 2 to 3 sessions a week, if not more. I can do some at the end of my session. I can do cardio in the morning and weights in the afternoon if I truly want. But mainly cardio sessions are about prolonging a level of activity for as long as we can. Somewhere between 20 minutes and 60 minutes is usually what we see. 60 minutes because if you're a PT with someone, that's appropriate. Most people don't want to train for more than an hour. 20 minutes at the lower end because we don't want to do so little that we don't see change in the weight loss journey. Continuous activity. So this is where most of your steady state training will come in. So for example, we might warm the client up for 10 to 15 minutes to make sure their muscles and joints are ready to go. And then we'll put them on a cardio machine for as long as we can, whether that be walking, running, bike riding, swimming, a circuit, whatever it be. And we put them in that state for as long as we can to burn the most calories. The easier we make the session, so let's say we make them on a really gentle bike ride and we put them in front of a TV and let them go about their way, it's likely they can do that for a longer period of time. So for a more deconditioned or a heavier client, that might be the way to go until they can develop enough physical strength and health to go into a more difficult forms of training. That might be a completely reasonable thing. Or if the client is fatigued or it's an evening or you want them to do something at home, you can just get them to hop on a little stationary bike and pedal away as they watch a movie. If you want to make it so that they can burn a little bit more calories, but again, you must sacrifice the amount of time they can do it. You can get them to go into jogging. You can get them to do swimming or something that's a little bit harder intensity. You can even get them to pedal harder on the bike if you want. If you want them to get higher intensity, you can get them to do sprint drills, whatever. But my point that I'm trying to make is that the easier the movement, the longer they can do it for. The harder the movement, the less time they can do it for. However, they burn more calories on the hard, they burn less calories on the easy, but one they can do longer. So it's just all about factoring that in. I always want at least 65% of their heart rate or above for easy, steady state movement. If they're just doing something and they're tracking their heart rate and it's like 30 or 40 or 50 or 55%, it's probably on the lower end of the spectrum for if we're trying to encourage weight loss for the client. We want 65% over a longer period of time. So that's good news because it means if you hate running, you think running is the worst thing ever, don't do it. Because if you don't like it, don't do it. That's fine. The reality is we just have to burn calories. We don't care how it's done. I just need you to do it. Okay, so if you don't like running but you like sitting on a bike, do it. If you don't like running but you like going for a gentle walk, do that. If you don't like walking and you want to go on a hike or you want to go on a long bike ride or you want to go to jiu-jitsu or you want to do any of that stuff, do it. That's totally fine. But it doesn't really matter as long as you're burning more calories than you're eating and ingesting. And that comes to a really, really big point that I have for you is that you must, as the coach of a nutrition program, as a coach of a weight loss client, have incredibly or at least decently good nutritional understanding because you are balancing their client's capacity in very small levels. We want to have just enough calorie deficit that the client's not getting sick or injured or tired. We still want them to feel full and feel energetic and ready to go, but not so much that they're not losing weight. So I heavily suggest that you start looking into your own nutritional education or start using some of the videos I've provided so that you can push your clients on the right track of nutritional understanding. It is a pillar, a must of weight loss. So if we look at the pillars of weight loss, it's how well they program. So how well is your program designed? How good is your nutrition around that program? And then as well as how well are you resting and recovering the client? Okay. These are your 3 pillars. And if you have watched my other videos, you've probably noticed it's the same pillars as hypertrophy and power. Crazy that, because these pillars are the pillars when we're looking for results in our programming. If we don't program well, if our program isn't up to snuff, we're not creating the stimulant that's allowing the body to do the thing we've asked it to do. If we haven't fueled the body well enough, it's either going to injure us along the journey, it's going to make us sick, or we're not going to have enough energy to actually perform the action that we've programmed. As well as if we've given them too much food, they're going to store weight, not lose it. And then if they're not sleeping, recovering, drinking their water, spending time rehabbing the joints that are being used all the time, they will not grow, because all of your growth happens in the periods of rest. All of their weight loss happens in the periods of rest, okay? That's the best, that's our golden hours, is our time that we're recovering and sleeping and resting. When it comes to recovery, understand that if I am needing to get my client to move a lot to generate energy to burn, then that means that there's going to be mechanical stress, muscle stress, and joint stress happening all the time. So if they're running for 4 or 5 times a week, their ankle joints, knee joints, and hip joints are gonna get used a lot. So we have to make sure that we're decoupling and we're creating decompression space in those joints, and the muscles above and below them is very, very relative. So keep an eye out for some of our stuff around recovery and rehab as we go through these programs and these moderately deep diving on the different styles of training. But those are the 3 pillars that you're gonna find are relative to all of our stuff. When it comes to weight loss, I mentioned at the start that it's tricky, and it is, because clients who come to you for weight loss usually are not athletic and fit already. They're usually on the heavier side and they need more and more coaching. So we're probably starting with someone who I would consider deconditioned, and that is totally okay. But what it does mean is that you might not be able to take the client on just yet, because they might fall out of your scope of practice, or they are too large for you to actually help. So a good test I have for people before I take people on as clients is I ask them 2 things. I ask them what their NEAT is, which in this instance is just steps. If you're a science nerd, NEAT is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so movements that you're doing outside of exercise in your day-to-day life, because all of that stuff accumulates in calorie burning. So things like steps is what I'm looking at. So that's thing 1 that I always look at. And I always look at water, because if our client is getting at least 8,000 steps a day and drinking the amount of water that's relative to their body type, which could be between 2 and 4 liters, then you will see weight loss traditionally. In theory, increasing steps and having water is a really good starting point in nutrition for when we're working with weight loss clients. Now, that does not mean that if this client comes in the door and they're getting 3,000 steps, I say you need to do 8,000 steps this week every day before I can train you. That's not realistic. It just means that maybe your sessions are more nutritionally focused, and every week we're trying to increase our steps by 200 steps a day until eventually they hit 8,000. I cannot stress enough that weight loss programming and weight loss and nutrition is more often lots of tiny little changes over long periods of time that result in long-term weight loss than it is massive changes. So if your client is having 1 liter of water a day, do not ask them to start drinking 3 out of nowhere. Tell them that 3 is the goal, and we're slowly increasing them over time. Remember, you get about 1 liter of water throughout your foods, particularly your water-rich vegetables, and then you ingest about 3 liters a day, depending on where you are geographically, your body type, your body size, your gender, and all those things. Okay, so these are things that you must consider when you're talking about weight loss. You must consider these things, okay? So, pros and cons. Let's quickly just touch on it. Pros for weight loss, you lose weight. It's very focused, which is really good. So, which means that like if you're kind of doing a global functional training program, although you will lose weight loss program specifically is so targeted that you'll lose weight very, very quickly in theory. So you lose weight. I have a saying around here that it's easier to burn a house down than it is to build a house. That's because weight loss is often quite quick. It will depend on your existing body mass tissue, your excess subcutaneous fat tissue, how much fat you have on your body. If you're more obese than another, or your client is more obese than another, you will lose more weight quicker because there's more to lose. I often tell people between 200 and 400 grams a week is roughly, once the program, the nutrition and the sleep are all up to snuff, quite common, at least in my experience, leaning more towards the 200 grams. It might sound low, and I hear some people lose kilos a week. It's usually water, but I do hear people lose those kind of kilos. I like weight that doesn't come back. So smaller habit changes last longer. It means you don't lose as much weight as quickly, but that weight doesn't come back because you're changing the person, not just the things they do, but the habits and who they are. Okay, so weight loss is really, really good for these things. It will improve your overall health. So stuff like your blood pressure, your breathing, your well-being, your doctor will be happy with you. So we love this kind of stuff. Helps you look better naked, which is the majority of people's goals are in general. These are good things. As far as downsides, it's hard to put on muscle mass during this time. So if you're trying to look for muscle mass growth, not really something we do with weight loss at the same time to the same effect. You can have them both go at the same time. However, you won't get the quicker results. You won't gain muscle as quickly as if you just do hypertrophy, and you won't lose weight as quickly if you just do weight loss. You get that weird happy in between. That's one thing. Second thing is that you need to have a decent understanding of nutrition, a decent understanding of recovery, and a decent understanding of programming, but that's why you're here anyway. It can be tedious. Some clients and coaches do it wrong. They assume that weight loss means sit on a bike and pedal until you're thin. If you're doing your programming right, you can mix in whatever form of training the client enjoys as long as it's in a calorie deficit, okay? There's not a whole lot of cons with weight loss. Obviously, since the client is new they might be a little bit more prone to injury, but the load itself is so light in that you're only doing 65 to 80% of your 1RM anyway, or 75% of your 1RM anyway, that it's not really heavy enough if you've advised your client how to train properly, that they're going to get injured along the process anyway. So do keep that in mind, that this is a really, really good, safe thing for clients traditionally to do. It is more on the linear side. That is a con. Linear being that your shoulders and hips don't really move away from each other, and something we discuss all the time on this channel. Transverse movement, so movement that is involved in rotation, is really good for farmer strength and longevity and health and making your body unbreakable. So that way it's very durable in lots of different spaces, but not traditionally seen as much in linear, because we want to do continuous movement over and over and over again, which is often more towards the linear space. So for example, I don't do a 20 or 30 minute run doing caricoses or doing spins and doing twists and turns. I usually run in a straight line. A good way to get around this is starting to get more and more involved in sports. Most sports lean more towards transverse strength and are traditionally a little bit more on the calorie burning side, of the cardiovascular side, like soccer and AFL and rugby and running around. So usually a good sign. One of the cons is you got to make sure you account for the fact that they're going to have overworked injuries. For all of this training process, think of people like cars. If I'm forever turning the wheels on the cars, eventually the tread will fade away, which is totally fine, but we have to make sure we replace the wheels when that happens and when that's appropriate. Okay. Excellent, team. Hopefully that's cleared up a little bit more about weight loss for you and how it kind of works as you start getting better and better in your programming. Remember that eventually I'm going to release hundreds of hours of programs, and as well as documents and documents and documents you can just strip and use yourself straight away while they're in development and coming out. Have a play with writing some weight loss stuff yourself. I would encourage you yourself to try your own weight loss program and your own nutritional program. Otherwise, you don't know if it's working or not. If you don't have the capacity to write your own stuff yet, lean on the resources around you. You have this channel, you have the programs, and you have the templates I have for you. You should have a mentor. If not, I suggest you get one in this space. If you're a client yourself, asking your PT or your coach questions about some of the stuff I've discussed to test if they're good enough for them to help you, that's a good start. Don't be trapped into the fact that some PTs sound really good, but on paper and in reality, they're actually don't know their stuff. So if they don't know about the 3 pillars and they don't know about calorie in, calorie out stuff, and they don't know about these things, it might be worth finding and shopping around with your PTs. Cool. Excellent, team. Hopefully that was helpful, and I will see you later for more of these minor deep dives into specific trainings.